CEO mocked the single dad mopping the hospital floor. His name was on the wing she just opened. The morning they cut the ribbon on the new trauma pavilion, the lobby smelled of fresh paint and lilies, and Jonah Keller was on his knees with a rag, working a scuff out of the polished floor before the donors arrived. He had been a custodian at St. Brendan's for 2 years. He did the work the way he did everything now, without hurry, without complaint, and without ever once looking up at the wall above the new reception desk, where a slab of pale granite carried a name in tall engraved letters. He was 42, lean and broad through the shoulders, with short dark brown hair going gray at the temples, and a few days of stubble he never quite stayed ahead of. There was a faded scar near his left eyebrow. He wore navy custodial coveralls with a name patch and a hospital badge clipped at the chest, and on his left hand, under the blue nitrile glove, was a wedding band he had not taken off in the 3 years since Hannah died. At 9, the doors opened and the donors came in, and behind them came Adrienne Cole, who ran the whole hospital system in a fitted navy suit with her dark hair cut sharp to her jaw. She had been hired 18 months ago to drag St. Brendan's out of the red, and the pavilion was meant to be the proof that she could. She walked the donors across the lobby toward the granite wall, talking about capacity and trauma response times, and she did not see Jonah until she nearly stepped in his bucket. He moved it back. He said nothing. He was good at saying nothing. "You," she said. The donors had paused to admire the wall, and she did not want them watching a man in coveralls scrub the floor on the morning the cameras were here. "We don't pay you to be underfoot on opening day. Take the bucket and the smell of it somewhere people aren't standing." A few of the staff heard it. A young nurse looked at the floor. Jonah looked at Adrienne for 1 second longer than a man in his position was supposed to, not angry, only steady, the way a man looks at weather he has already decided to walk through. Then he nodded once, gathered the mop and the bucket, and rolled the cart toward the service corridor. In the wire tray on the side, under the rags, was a folded sheet of construction paper with a child's drawing on it, a house and a sun and 2 stick figures holding hands. But no one saw that, and he did not show them. Behind Adrienne, the granite wall read, "The Keller Trauma Pavilion," and beneath it, in smaller letters, "In memory of those who could not pay," and she gave the engraving a satisfied glance and turned the donors toward the elevators, and did not think about the janitor again that day. Jonah drove home at 3 to the small rented house on the east edge of town where the streets gave way to scrub oak and chain link. June was on the porch with a library book across her knees and her sneakers not quite reaching the boards. She was 8, pale, with light brown hair to her shoulders and her mother's gray-blue eyes, and she had the habit of going very still when she was thinking. "Mrs. Okonkwo's dog got out again," she reported. "I put him back. She gave me a cookie." "Did you charge her?" "You can't charge people for their own dog," June said, with the patience of a child, correcting an adult who should know better, and he smiled because it was the kind of thing Hannah would have said. He made dinner, rice and beans and the last of the good peppers, and they ate at the table with the television off, the way they had eaten since Hannah got sick. Afterward, June drew at the kitchen table while he washed the 2 bowls, and when she went up, she left the new drawing on the counter for him to find. A man, a girl, and in the corner, smaller, a woman with long hair drawn off to one side, watching. He set it in the drawer with the others and turned off the light. What he did not do that night, and had not done in 3 years, was open the cardboard box on the top shelf of the hall closet behind the towels where the rest of his life was. A framed diploma, a photograph of Hannah in scrubs in the old emergency department, laughing at something off camera, a smear of someone's finger paint still on her sleeve from the pediatric floor, the little laminated badge she had worn for 9 years, the lanyard frayed soft, and a letter from the hospital foundation, 3 years old, thanking the anonymous donor whose gift, made in memory of his late wife, would build a trauma center for families who arrived with nothing. He knew every word of it. He had written most of the conditions himself at the kitchen table the month after the funeral, when sleep would not come, and the only thing that quieted the house was deciding where the money should go. He had asked them to put the family name on the wall and to never, ever connect it to a man. They had honored half of it. The box lived on the top shelf, the way some griefs do, exactly where you know it is. And you do not reach for it. Adrienne could not have said why the custodian stayed in her head. Maybe it was the way he had looked at her, that extra second, level and unbothered. Maybe it was nothing. But that night the pavilion took its first real test, and what she saw there she could not explain away. A church van and a pickup had met head-on out on the county highway, and the new trauma bays filled at once with more broken people than the night staff had hands for. Adrian had stayed late for the donor dinner and was in the corridor in her good suit when the ambulances came, and she stood against the wall, useless, watching her expensive new pavilion strain at the seams. A boy of maybe 10 was bleeding badly from a torn vessel high in the thigh, and the resident's hands were shaking, and the trauma surgeon was 40 minutes out, and the bleeding would not wait 40 minutes. The janitor was mopping the corridor. He set the mop against the wall. He crossed to the bay, snapped on a fresh pair of gloves from the box on the cart by reflex, and said, in a voice that was quiet but left no room, "Direct pressure here, 2 fingers, lean your weight in. You, get me a clamp and a tray. Tell the OR they have a vascular case coming up in 4 minutes, not 40. The resident looked at him, and something in the way the man stood, the stillness of him in the middle of all that motion, made her obey before she had decided to. He talked them through it as he worked, low and even. This is the femoral. It's not cut all the way through. That's why he's still with us. Watch the color of the blood, not the amount. Dark as a vein and you can wait. Bright as an artery and you cannot. He found the vessel with his fingers the way other men find a light switch in a dark room they have lived in for years. He pinched it off and held it, and the floor of blood stopped widening, and a nurse who had been counting under her breath stopped counting. He had the bleeding controlled before the charge nurse reached the bay, and when she did reach it, an older woman named Ruth, with steel-gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, she stopped dead and went white, because she had worked beside those hands a long time ago, and she knew them. "Get him up to the OR," Jonah said, stripping the gloves. "He'll keep now. The team can take it from here." And then he picked up the mop, because the corridor still needed doing, and that was the part Adrian could not get out of her head afterward, that the man had saved a child's life and then gone back to the floor as if he had only stepped away to take a call. She found him the next evening, alone, wiping down the baseboards of the empty administrative floor. "What you did downstairs," she said. "That wasn't a man who took a first aid class." "The boy needed pressure," Jonah said. "Anybody close enough would have leaned on it." "They didn't," she said. "You did. And you called the vascular case before you'd opened him up. You knew what it was from across the room." She studied him. "Who are you?" "I clean your floors," he said, and picked up the card and left her standing in the hall. She went looking the next morning, quietly, the way she had learned to do things in 18 months of not trusting the people her predecessor had trusted. There was a name on the custodial roster, J. Keller, 2 years, no incidents. She typed it into the state medical board's license lookup almost as a joke. It was not a joke. Jonah A. Keller, MD, Trauma and Vascular Surgery. 15 years at a Level 1 center 2 states over, 8 of them as chief. A wall of credentials, a list of published techniques, a teaching award with his face beside it, leaner, younger, but the same steady eyes. License voluntarily inactive 3 years ago. And then she did the thing that made her sit back in her chair, because the name on the license was the name on the granite wall in her own lobby, and the foundation's records, when she pulled them, listed the Keller gift as anonymous, the donor's identity sealed at his own request. The man she had told to take the smell of his work somewhere else had paid for the building she had cut the ribbon on, and he had not said one word about it. She sat with that for a long time. Then she did what she had taught herself to do when a number would not sit still. She pulled the ledgers, 3 years of foundation disbursements, and read them line by line until very late, and the restricted fund that was supposed to sit untouched and grow had a slow leak in it, small transfers, each one just under the threshold that would have flagged a review, each one classified by a hand that knew exactly which boxes a tired auditor would not open. She found Ruth in the supply room on the 4th floor that afternoon, the charge nurse who had gone white in the trauma bay. Ruth set down her clipboard and looked at Adrian for a long moment, the way you look at someone's new boss when you are deciding how much truth she has earned. "You know who he is," Adrian said. "I knew his wife," Ruth said. "Hannah worked the pediatric floor here for 9 years, best nurse I ever trained. She married a surgeon who was too good for the rest of us to be comfortable around. And then she got sick, and he took leave to be with her. And after she went, he couldn't walk back into an OR. She took off her glasses and let them hang. He gave this hospital everything he and Hannah had saved, on one condition, that nobody make it about him. You opened a building with his name on it and told him to get out from underfoot. She put the glasses back on. Leave that man be. I can't, Adrian said. No, Ruth said softly. I don't suppose you can. I told his wife the same thing about him once, that he never could leave a wrong thing sitting in a room he was standing in. You've got the same trouble. I can see it from here. That evening, Jonah was fixing the latch on June's bicycle in the yellow square of the porch light when the dark car pulled up and Adrian got out. She did not come past the gate. You're Dr. Keller, she said. The wing is named for you. You built it. He tested the latch with his thumb. I clean it, he said. Don't, she said. Please, a boy is alive because you were holding a mop 40 feet away. I run a hospital that has your name carved into the lobby and I didn't know you were inside it. I need to understand what I'm sitting on top of, and you're the only one who can tell me. June came to the screen door in her pajamas. Dad, who is it? Someone from work, Jonah said. Go on up, I'll be there in a minute. The girl looked at Adrian with frank assessment, the way children do, and went. Jonah wiped his hands on a rag and looked at the woman at his gate. I left that life for a reason, he said. I'm not going back into it. I'm not asking you to, she said. I'm asking you to tell me the truth one time. Then you never have to see me again. He thought about it longer than she expected. Then he opened the gate. Inside, at the table, with June asleep upstairs, he told her the shape of it without the wound at the center. He had been a trauma surgeon, a good one. Hannah had been a nurse on the pediatric floor of this very hospital, back when it was a tired old building that turned no one away. When she died, he had taken what they had built together and given it to the place that had been her whole working life, on the single condition that it be spent on the people who came through the doors with nothing, and that no one make a monument out of him. Then he had told the medical board to let his license go quiet, and he had taken a job pushing a cart 10 minutes from his daughter's school, where no one would ask him to open another person up. Why are you really here? He said. It isn't the boy, it isn't the wall. She did not answer right away, which was its own answer. The pavilion is running out of money, she said finally. 6 weeks after opening, the charity fund your gift was supposed to protect is nearly empty, and I can't find where it went. And every time I pull a thread, it leads back to my own chief financial officer. Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then start there, he said. A building doesn't bleed money on its own. Someone opened the vein. Grant Mercer was 51 and had been the hospital's chief financial officer for 9 years through 3 administrators, and he had expected, when the last one retired, that the board would finally give him the top chair instead of an outsider in a sharp suit. They had not. He had smiled and congratulated her and begun, quietly, to build the door he would leave through. There was a private equity group that wanted St. Brendan's, wanted to strip the charity trauma service and turn the new pavilion into a cash machine for paying patients, and Mercer had been moving the restricted Keller endowment into the operating accounts a little at a time, reclassifying donor-restricted money as unrestricted so the books would look healthy enough to sell. The gift agreement forbade exactly that. Releasing or repurposing the fund required the donor's written consent, and the donor was anonymous and, Mercer had assumed, long gone. So Grant Mercer had solved the problem the way he solved most problems. He had forged the consent, a signature traced from a 3-year-old foundation document, and filed it, and assumed no one would ever match it to a living hand. Adrian asked Ruth for the original gift agreement, the real one, the sealed one. Ruth looked at her a long time, then went to the back of the records room, to a locked drawer she had kept the key to for 3 years, and took out a plain folder. Hannah asked me to hold a copy, Ruth said, the week before she passed. She said her husband wouldn't keep anything that reminded him. She said one day someone honest might need it. Inside was the gift agreement, the restriction in plain language, the fund to be spent only on patients who could not pay, never transferred, never repurposed, without the written consent of the donor. Clipped behind it, something Ruth had added herself, a printout of an email from 3 weeks ago, from Grant Mercer's account to a forwarding address inside the private equity firm. One line. Reclassify the restricted balance as unrestricted before the audit. I'll handle the consent. Adrian held the page and felt the floor of her own hospital tilt under her. She went back to the East Side house on a Thursday, and this time June opened the door first and looked up and said, "You're the lady who reads things wrong, because children repeat the parts adults wish they wouldn't." Jonah came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder, and Adrian held up the folder, and he understood at once. He read it slowly, the load-bearing part first, the way he read anything that mattered. When he reached the forged consent, the signature that was meant to be his, he set his hand flat on the page and held it there, his knuckles white, and then the breath went out of him and his hand opened again, deliberate, the way of a man who had decided a long time ago not to make a fist in front of his daughter. "That isn't my signature," he said quietly. "It's close. He got the K wrong." He pressed where I lift. "He's had my name in a drawer for 3 years, and he never once watched how a man signs the thing he gave away." June had come back down in her socks and crossed straight to Adrian and held up a fresh drawing, the way she did with people she had decided about. 3 figures now, a man, a girl, and a woman with dark hair pulled back, holding hands under a yellow sun. Adrian took it in both hands like it was something that might break. She had not been given anything for free in a long time. Jonah watched his daughter, and then he watched the woman holding the drawing, and the hardness he carried loosened by one notch. "I came to give you the truth," Adrian said. "You deserve to see who signed your name." "You came because you don't have anyone to tell when you're tired," Jonah said. He was not unkind about it. She did not answer, which was its own answer. "There's a board meeting Friday," she said. "He's going to present the sale as a rescue. The vote is scheduled. If it passes, the charity service is gone by spring, and your name stays on a building that turns poor people away." Jonah stood and folded the dish towel and set it on the counter. "Then we go Friday," he said, and she noticed that he had said "we," and she did not remark on it, because she had learned by then that with him the important words came in small, and you did not chase them. Grant Mercer learned that Adrian had been in the records room from a clerk who owed him a favor, and he moved the way frightened, careful men move, smoothly. On Thursday, a man Jonah did not know was parked across from June's school at pickup with a phone held low. Ruth called that evening to say a stranger had been in the records room, asking which custodian worked the trauma floor. Jonah took June to Hannah's mother 4 blocks over and stood in the doorway and told the old woman to lock everything and open the door for no one until he came back. June held his sleeve. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. "No, baby," he said. "Somebody else is. I'm just the one who's going to say so." That night, for the first time in 3 years, he took the cardboard box down from the top shelf behind the towels. He needed the foundation letter, the original, so the examiner would have a true version of his hand to set the forgery against. He lifted out the frame and the photograph and the frayed badge and set them on the bed one at a time, and he sat with the picture of Hannah laughing in the old emergency department for a while, the finger paint on her sleeve. And he did not cry. He had done that. But something in his chest that had been clenched for 3 years let go by a single degree. Then he found the letter, and he read his own conditions back to himself in his own handwriting. "Spend it on the ones who come with nothing, never make it a monument," and he understood that a man had tried to turn the kindest thing he had ever done into a weapon against the people it was meant for, and that he was the only one alive who could stop it. He put everything back in the box except the letter. He left the box down off the shelf this time, on the floor of the closet where he could reach it, and he found, oddly, that he did not mind it being there. The board met Friday afternoon in the glass room on the top floor of the new pavilion. 9 members, 2 attorneys, the private equity men in a row along the wall like crows on a fence. Grant Mercer stood at the head of the table in a charcoal suit and walked them through the slides, the operating losses, the generous offer, the responsible thing to do, and he smiled the smile of a man who had already counted the votes. Adrian let him finish. Then she said, "Before we vote, I'd like to introduce the donor whose gift built this pavilion." And the room turned, and Jonah walked in. He had traded the coveralls for the one dark suit he owned, 10 years out of fashion, pressed that afternoon. He carried a plain folder. He did not look at the equity men. He found Ruth standing by the door and gave her the smallest nod, and then he set the folder on the table. "My name is Jonah Keller," he said. I'm the donor. The fund that built this place was given on one condition, that it be spent on people who arrive here with nothing, and that it never be moved. He let it sit. 2 weeks ago, someone moved it. The consent that authorized it carries my signature. I didn't sign it. I never have. Whoever traced it got the letter wrong, the way a man does when he's copying a name instead of meaning it. The screen behind him changed. Adrian put up the gift agreement beside the forged consent, the true signature beside the traced one, the difference ringed in red by an examiner 2 days fast. Then, the ledger, the restricted balance bleeding into the operating accounts month by month. Then, the email, one line, reclassify the restricted balance as unrestricted before the audit. I'll handle the consent. This fund was my wife's life made into a building, Jonah said, and his voice did not rise. She spent 9 years on the floor below us taking care of children whose families couldn't pay the parking, let alone the bill. The man who emptied her fund to sell this hospital for parts is standing in this room. I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm here so the record says what this place was built to be. The silence had weight. Grant Mercer stood and his face had gone the color of the paper the lies were printed on. You walked away 3 years ago, he said. You don't get to walk back in and pretend you still belong here. Jonah looked at him and did not raise his voice. I don't need to belong here, he said. I just need you to know I still remember everything. Adrian took the floor. Grant Mercer is removed as Chief Financial Officer effective now. The sale is dead. We are referring the forged consent and the diverted funds to the Attorney General and the state charity regulator tonight. The vote came in 7-2, the two being the men Mercer had quietly courted. In the elevator lobby, 2 investigators were already waiting, and Grant Mercer walked to them without resistance, which was worse than if he had run. In the weeks after, the story moved through the city paper and then the wires. Mercer was charged with forgery, fraud, and the theft of restricted charitable funds, and the equity deal collapsed in a single afternoon under a subpoena. 2 board members resigned. Adrian declined every interview and gave one written statement, 11 sentences long, and signed her name to it. She brought back the 2 nurses Mercer had quietly cut the spring before, the ones who had asked too many questions about the fund, and she sat with each family the pavilion had turned away in its 6 lean weeks and made it right, one at a time, driving to 3 towns to do it, and did not interrupt while they told her what the turning away had cost them. One mother had buried a husband who waited too long at a clinic that took insurance the pavilion could have waived. Adrian listened to all of it with her hands folded and her statement-writing pen nowhere in sight. And when the woman was done, she said only that she was sorry and that it would not happen in that building again. And she meant it in a way she had not meant much of anything in 18 months. The charity service came back, fuller than before, and Adrian built a standing fund to keep it safe from the next clever man with a spreadsheet, and named it the Hannah Keller Fund, after a pediatric nurse she had never met, before she had told Jonah she was going to. Jonah did not pick up a scalpel again, not full-time, but he let the hospital list him, quietly, as an on-call consultant for mass casualty events, the nights when the bays filled faster than the staff could hold, and on those nights he came in and stood at the center of the noise and made it quiet. And then he went home. He kept the custodial job too for a while, because he liked the building empty and the floors clean, and because the work asked nothing of him but care. And care was the one thing he had never run out of. On a gray morning in March, Adrian drove him to the cemetery at the edge of town where Hannah was buried, and she stayed 3 steps back while he crouched and laid a sprig of something he had pulled from the fence line on the grass before the stone. She heard him say, low, not quite to anyone, they tried to take it and turn it into the thing you hated, and I didn't let them. He did not say more. Adrian did not come closer. She understood that her place at that moment was not nearer, and that there are conversations a man has with a stone that a living person is only allowed to stand near and not inside. On the drive back, neither of them spoke, and the silence was not heavy, only full, the way a room is full after the music stops but before anyone has decided to leave. Adrian started coming by on the weekends, first with a reason and then without one. She traded her heels for flat shoes that got scuffed and learned the names of June's library books, and let the girl beat her at a card game whose rules changed whenever June was losing. One evening, she watched Jonah teach June to take a splinter out of her own palm, his big hands over the girl's small ones, slow, no wasted motion, the same economy she had seen him use in the trauma bay on a torn artery, as if to him there were no difference, only things that needed doing right and gently. "Hold still," he told the girl. "If it hurts more than a second, I'm doing it wrong." June held still and looked up at him with the pride of a child trusted with a real thing, and Adrian, watching from the doorway with a cup of tea going cold in her hand, understood that this was the whole of him, that the surgeon and the janitor and the father were one quiet person all the way down. On a clear Saturday in spring, the three of them planted a small garden along the side of the house, Jonah turning the soil, June dropping seeds two to a hole because she had decided one was lonely, Adrian kneeling in the dirt in an old shirt of his that did not quite fit. June looked up and asked, "Are you going to stay forever?" The way children ask the questions adults are too careful to, and Adrian glanced at Jonah, who had stopped and was looking at her, and she said, "I'm thinking about it." Jonah set down the spade and asked June to go fill the watering can, and the girl ran off, and he turned to Adrian. The yard smelled of turned earth and cut grass. "You don't have to promise a child something you haven't promised yourself," he said. "I'm promising both of them," she said, at the same time. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he raised his hand and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear with the back of one knuckle, the first time he had touched her in all the weeks she had been coming. She did not pull back. He did not move closer. It was a moment, no more, but it was long enough for both of them to know it had finally arrived. June came back across the grass with the watering can sloshing, and slipped one wet hand into her father's and one into Adrian's, and turned the three of them gently to face the little run of turned soil, the way she did, as if this had always been the arrangement, and she had only been waiting for the grown-ups to catch up. By summer the garden was up, and June ran a stand by the road selling the extra tomatoes for a quarter each, and on a good Saturday she was the richest person on the street. Adrian kept a small office downtown 2 days a week and let the rest of the old life go, the calls, the galas, the friends who stopped calling when she stopped answering, and she found, by the 3rd month, that she did not miss any of it. She started staying for dinner on the nights she came, and then on the nights she did not have a reason to, and Jonah set a 3rd place at the table without remarking on it, the way he did most of the things that mattered. The pavilion's lobby still carried the family name on its granite wall, but now everyone who worked there knew the man it belonged to, and they did not point him out, because he had asked them not to, and because some kinds of respect are best kept quiet. A man had been told to take himself and the smell of his work somewhere out of sight, in a building he had paid for with the last of what he and his wife had saved. Some people carry their worth where the world can read it, carved in stone over a door. Others carry it in their hands, and you never learn what those hands were holding until you finally stop long enough to watch them work.